My name is Jay Sugarman, and I want to welcome you to Museum Open House. This ongoing series features and highlights many of the outstanding museums and other cultural institutions. The main purpose of most programs is to inform viewers about current and upcoming exhibits, various programs, resources, and other opportunities that are available for the general public. Today via Zoom, we're fortunate to have as our guest Devon Zimmerman from the Ogunquit Museum of American Art. Devon serves as the Associate Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art, and he's here today to inform us about the history and mission of the museum and the wide range of programming that it's available for visitors. To better understand and appreciate the museum's offerings and goals, Devon will be taking us on a behind-the-scenes tour of the current outstanding exhibitions that are on display, both inside and outside the museum. Let's start by meeting Devon and then learning all about the Ogunquit Museum of American Art. Welcome, Devon. So delighted to be able to be here.
A pleasure, Jay. Thank you so much for having me.
I've had the wonderful opportunity to visit the museum on actually a number of occasions, so really eager to hear what's currently on display and have you inform viewers. But before we jump right to that, I also think it would be of interest if you just briefly share a little bit about your background, current position, and what attracted you to the museum in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the museum's current curator of modern and contemporary art. I'm new to the institution. I've been at OMA now for just a little over a year and change, and came up from New York. I was previously at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, where I was working with a group of curators on an exhibition called Deconstructing Power, W.E.B. Du Bois, the 1900 World's Fair. And what attracted me to the museum was my partner and I had a daughter during the pandemic, and we were looking to get closer to family in New England, and came for an interview at the museum. And I'm sure we'll see shortly, and what anyone who comes to visit the museum will find is an amazing institution on probably one of the most beautiful sites for a museum in New England, with also a tremendous collection. So between the location, its permanent collection, and just dynamic spaces, it offered so much potential for kind of creative projects and engagement.
No, a wonderful choice on your part, indeed. Would you please start by sharing a little bit about the history and overall mission of the museum, please?
Yes, so we're actually celebrating our 70th anniversary this year at OMA. The museum was incorporated in 1952 by artist and philanthropist Henry Strader, who was a student and member of the arts community here in Ogunquit, and worked collaboratively with a group of other artists in the area to purchase the 3 acres of land that the museum is on from the Woodbury family, who was one of the founding artists who started the first art school in Ogunquit in 1898. And collaboratively, and in conjunction with an architect named Charles Worley Jr., fashioned this really remarkable mid-century building right on the water on the southern coast of Maine. So we've been going 70 years strong, and you can see the building in the background here, a remarkable inventive space that was set directly onto a granite ledge. So you could see through the museum and out into the ocean with this remarkable framed view by a brand new glass wall that we had installed just last year. So it's a unique space that is, paying homage to some of these fisherman shacks and that became former art students studios in Perkins Cove, and a building that's kind of built from a lot of materials sourced from the area, and then nestled on these remarkable gardens that have been tended to for almost now the last quarter century by our landscaping crew, John and Carol, who have done a remarkable job creating these stunning gardens and wandering paths that host the museum's permanent collection of outdoor sculptures right by the sea.
Yeah, gorgeous, gorgeous. And then we're going to see the current exhibits, but just an overall word about opportunities inside the way things are laid out, collections.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, when I started, one of the things that blew me away about this institution was its really remarkable permanent collection, which comes out of the long history that Ogunquit has with American modernism since really the turn of the 20th century. The first school, as I mentioned, was started here by Charles Woodbury in 1898, a Bostonian who brought up a whole bevy of artists from Massachusetts, but then began to attract artists working in kind of late Impressionism and post-Impressionism from throughout New England and the nation. And then a secondary figure by the name of Hamilton Easterfield, who's an equally remarkable collector, artist, patron, critic, commissioned Pablo Picasso to have his first interior design scheme constructed, and was one of the most important movers and shakers in New York City around World War I for modernism and European modernism as well. So you could see one of my projects was to think about Ogunquit's place in this amazing interconnected web that animated American modernism, not just in the United States, but across the globe. And so from Marsden Hartley to Walt Kuhn to Mark Tobey to Jacob Lawrence and other figures, we have this just tremendous collection that's currently on display in a reimagined and narrative-driven installation that looks at why individuals were coming to these art schools scattered throughout the country, from Taos to Monhegan to, of course, Ogunquit and Woodstock and the places that like, and trying to kind of unpack those stories. So we have a wonderful foundation here with our permanent collection.
Most definitely. Well, let's move on to the current exhibitions that are on display. Just a quick word about maybe some of the thinking, the planning that went into assembling this incredibly talented, diverse group of artists that we're going to be seeing in a minute.
Yes, it's been a delightful pleasure working with our executive director, Amanda Lahikainen. We've set the tone for a kind of new moment at the museum. And these three contemporary exhibitions are part of a larger reimagining as you come to the museum of our exhibition spaces and the types of stories that we want to tell. And that comes directly from the mission that Amanda has sort of set for the institution, that is divided by this kind of tripartite thinking of thinking about blurring the boundaries between the interior of the museum and the exterior of our beautiful gardens and our specific unique space and location on the Maine coast. Thinking historically in dialogues between modernism and contemporary artists currently practicing now, and how to inflect, rethink, tell new stories contemporaneously, but also historically as we re-examine these figures who passed through Ogunquit and their lives that they lived and the work that they produced. And then knowing that those individuals were not just in Ogunquit and spread throughout the country and the globe. So looking to tell more stories that highlight both local artists, but also global stories, and acknowledge the interconnected world that we have always lived in and continue to live in. So it has been kind of that guiding point, and one that sort of worked out almost poetically in the way that our mid-season exhibitions have worked out together in dialogue.
Now, it's an incredibly exciting vision. And as we're about to see, you and your colleagues have pulled it off tremendously, and I think have set a high bar, high standards for continuing exhibitions to come. But let's take the minute to get to know a little bit about the first artist we're featuring here, Ever Baldwin, entitled Down the Line.
Yes, so this show of Ever Baldwin's work, who is an artist based out of Catskill, New York, but got their MFA from the MFA school in Boston, has family in Massachusetts and in Maine, and I came across Ever's work and was utterly floored by Ever's idiosyncratic aesthetic, this blurring of frame and composition, which I can talk more about, and playing with that into what is just a really remarkable exhibition down the line, which plays off this idea of the line as kind of a conceptual tool through which Ever's been exploring and working. I want to go to the next slide.
Let's look at a few of the pieces in particular.
Yes, it's one of these things where images fail reality so greatly, but Ever works in this incredibly intuitive process, beginning with a stretched canvas. Ever will make marks that begin this kind of intuitive process of building, and his surfaces are incredibly thick and three-dimensional as he'll blend pigment and wax and marble dust together to create this thick impasto that you could actually see brushstrokes kind of pulled against. And as the compositions evolve intuitively, is pinging, and this is kind of one of the lines of thought, or literally thinking about a line as lineage, as Ever reflects on early 20th century American moderns. One thinks of Arthur Dove, one thinks of Marston Hartley, Georgia O'Keeffe, as well as European counterparts who are engaging in forms of spiritualism and abstraction and the flexibility of that. And then as Ever settled in Catskill, he'd been a sculptor up until, relatively recently, continuing to paint, but really diving into the medium since, and lent that sculptural talent to beginning to kind of collect and work on these remarkable hand-carved wooden frames that build out of and extend from the compositions within them. And while looking at an architectural building that was then being treated through the Japanese process of shoshugiban, where you burn the exterior tiles so it becomes this kind of non-carcinogenic way of sealing the facade of a building, Ever talks about loving the scent and the texture and just the appearance of that. So once these canvases are set into these hand-carved frames, and the frames are kind of molded and shaped around the compositions, Ever then blackens them with open flame and seals the edges or the frames then with oil to kind of keep that patina permanent. And it becomes this amazing dialogue between painting and frame, and explores, and yes, this is a wonderful example. You can see the three-dimensionality of these works, and also their scent is wonderful. They smell of this beautiful wood and ashen kind of fragrance, and plays with these boundaries and these binaries that we often have in art history of, the frame being a portal or a window into a new world, and complicates these. And Ever's work really plays with these kinds of slippages that often, visitors, I've been joking, we want to set up a Freudian-like couch in the middle of the gallery, because the amount of readings that come from these forms that are always signs, but just out of the reach of Ever kind of solidifying around an object or something that's fully and formally legible. And they just become these remarkable, abstract, semi-figurative works that just lead in this kind of constant motion and churning of interpretation, of meaning, and the slippages that constantly happen with it. So you're just kind of left looking and being present in front of them.
Oh, it's truly captivating, and I've never seen anything like it. And as you mentioned at the outset, the images don't do them justice. So personally looking forward to seeing them in person sometime soon. Let's move on to the second artist that we want to highlight for a few minutes, Liam Lee. What has he assembled for the exhibition?
So Liam Lee is a really brilliant designer who is in his early career out of Brooklyn, New York. And we were fortunate enough to collaborate and develop this concept around an idea that has long influenced him, which is of spontaneous generation, this kind of anachronistic view, pre-modern science that tried to explain the emergence of life from seemingly sterile or hostile environments, that life could somehow generate organic material from inorganic materials. And there was something that always inspired him, both with his interest in nature, but also with the labor-intensive processes that he works, that these furniture pieces and tapestries can emerge or seem like they emerge from nothing. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. Liam is self-taught, which is even more remarkable. He got his degree in English and from the University of Chicago, and then eventually began working as a set designer in the fashion industry and picked up felting as a way to kind of find an avenue and outlet for his own creative expression, and began working on these remarkable throws. They were originally throw blankets that then evolved into these beautiful wall hangings. And he begins by sourcing the panels, each panel from looms in Europe, and then hand dyes these panels using acid dyes to get these remarkable colors that are, again, so idiosyncratic to his own kind of intuitive visual palette. It's remarkable. And then begins the process of needle felting, which is an adapted process from kind of industrial felting techniques, where you take a ball of wool, in this case, hand-dyed wool, and begin using a serrated needle to agitate the wool so it becomes entangled mechanically. And this allows you to take something as soft and billowy as wool and make it more malleable, make it denser and three-dimensional and sculptural. So he takes these tapestries or furniture pieces, which are projects that he started undertaking during the pandemic when he lost his job, when the fashion industry essentially stopped, and wanted to bring kind of beauty and wonderment into, and the natural environment into his Brooklyn apartment. So these chairs are sublime and surreal, very literally in person. And they're all built up with just felted wool, needle felted wool. He has a wooden carcass made and then adheres an initial layer of wool to that carcass, and then just begins to felt and build in this additive process to create forms that resemble microbes, that resemble petals or flowers, but of course, only resemble them and are their own unique shape. So there is no padding, there is no cushioning or filler. This is all painstaking work. It takes about 3 months to make each chair, which is just simply remarkable.
And here's some nice close-up of other pieces.
Yes, and so I mentioned his kind of intuitive approach to color. He often works with these kind of conceptual studies that he works out color combinations, explores different forms, and then proceeds to experiment with then dyeing the wool separately and finding these really brilliant ways of combining and mixing and melding different colored wools into these just vibrant and radiant furniture pieces and tapestries.
Now the colors are stunning.
Yes, and it's again, I think that there's something both about materials that connect all these shows, but also this sense of wonderment. And it's that wonder that also is at the driving heart of this notion of spontaneous generation, of seeing something anew or being taken aback. And a lot of that also occurs in Liam's work through these slippages, almost in a similar way to Evers, that these tapestries, they look like they could be on the ground or a close-up shot of a petri dish under the microscope, or they could be these celestial star maps, or mid-century abstractions. And they constantly ask you to look and relook and get up close and see how these colors gradiate into one another and blend and create just these remarkable compositions.
Oh, you just have to admire the creativity of both Liam and Ever. And the next artist that we want to highlight is Meg Webster.
Yes, and it's been an honor to work with Meg. So this really beautiful and almost silently poetic installation was organized by my terrific colleague, Teresa Choi, who's the assistant curator here at the museum. And we worked with Meg to create 5 site-specific sculptures, both in and immediately outside the gallery's spaces, as well as Meg had worked with our gardening crew to rethink and replant the plantings and growth all around the pond and the stream that runs through the property with pollinating gardens. So you can walk through and see all these wonderful flowers attracting different pollinating insects. And that goes to the heart of Meg's work. She was originally drawn to these earthen materials and went to Yale and graduated in 1983, creating many of these early forms and types of forms that are on view in the gallery, and then had her first show at Donald Judd's space in 1983, the year that she graduated. And Meg's work asks visitors and asks, observers to think about materiality, to think about ecology, to think about the human body and the relationship and dynamics between all of these spaces and places. So one of the works, and all of these are kind of the first iterations even though they're part of series of works that she's been doing, specifically reflecting and responding to the space of the gallery that they're installed in. So Sand Circle is bringing alive one of the earliest series of works that Meg did in the early 80s, in which she harvested sand and created these shaped forms directly on the floor that is wonderful to have this kind of homage to her early kind of initial investigations into earthworks. And it works wonderfully with the site kind of greeting visitors in right at our remarkable glass wall that you can see behind it, gently kind of guiding visitors in almost like a beach itself. And then we'll be installing the last and final piece of the work in the coming weeks, a large 5 by 5 by 5 foot tank of nearest ocean water, which is part of her Nearest Water series. Water is kind of a really rich system of meanings and has been a point of inspiration for Meg's work. And so we'll be pumping water from directly out of the museum into this tank as it will kind of live. So you enter in through this prism of water and see the world out through this prism of water and think about its relationship to the ocean, then into the sand circle. And then we kind of shift and pivot into these more earthen tones. So the tall cone of soil is another reinvestigation of a number of compacted earth sculptures that Meg has made. And it's really, really phenomenal. It's made from a proprietary mix of soils. And you see as the earth is kind of compacted into this shape, this sort of geometric, almost platonic shape, which is then brought down into our own human world, this kind of layering, almost striation of topsoils that alludes to kind of a different temporality, almost like a geological time in which we think as if this was sort of extracted out of the ground, and you can see the passages. And it's living, which is wonderful. And we'll talk about another very literally living thing. As the cone is drying out, the colors of the soil are changing and will evolve over the run of the show.
I know we're going to move on to insight, even though it's hard to leave that view and the outside of the ocean. But for the sake of time, just a very brief word about Meg's work that viewers can look forward to inside.
Yes, and again, looking at, for example, her raised volume for lying flat, which is a living moss bed on a gabion cage of peat moss. That, is the shape and scale of a human lying, so almost a metaphorical bed to lie on, which has us think about our, actual sort of bed, this tactile sensation of the moss. Again, thinking temporally, the lifespan of moss, then the lifespan of the earth underneath it, this almost kind of implicit memento mori of lying on this bed of moss, our temporality, our own sort of lived experience and its limitations and its ephemerality. And then sort of along with the site specificity of the moss itself and the moss that grows on the property, Meg was also inspired by the large amount of sumac that's on the grounds as well. And so this drawing is one of a series of drawings that Meg has done, bringing materials onto paper, from spices like cinnamon to materials like clay and butter. So to have this sumac, which is directly in dialogue with the gardens and our beautiful sumac groves on the grounds, is really wonderful. And again, has visitors come in and immediately start thinking about the place that they're in, the grounds, and kind of our vulnerable and interesting place on the Maine's ecological kind of coastline.
Mm-hmm. Well, to further add to these three outstanding exhibitions, outside is this unbelievable mural by painter muralist Joe Wardwell. A few words in the time remaining about this opportunity.
Yeah, this was just a fantastic and wonderful project to work with Joe, who is so generous and just a wonderful, wonderful, and incredibly talented artist. With this whitewashed building, trying to think about how to activate it and rethink about the museum's place in this landscape, Joe, in his process of different layerings, created a site-specific mural that takes landscape images directly of the Marginal Way, which is nearby, as well as Perkins Cove, in which we sit, and then layered upon that text that he took from the poet and activist Marjorie Agosin, who lives in Ogunquit and writes a lot about her migration from Chile to Ogunquit and the coasts in the Pacific and the Atlantic, and then set upon that this beautiful abstract pattern and the original Spanish from her poetry, but the pattern is reflecting the kind of arching of the roof line of the building. So it blends architecture, the poetries of the ocean and its symbolic weight, and this knowledge that we're on this kind of vulnerable site right on 50 feet away from the ocean itself.
That's brilliant. It's brilliant. Yeah. In the time remaining, I know related to the exhibitions have a wonderful set of extended programming and events. A quick word about what opportunities for visitors and others to hear even more or experience the museum in additional ways.
Yes, so we carry a series of artist talks and conversations over the run of the season. Our next two will be Ever Baldwin on September 12th, Tuesday, and all of our talks occur on Tuesday. And then Joe Wardwell and Marjorie Agosin will be here the following week, September 19th. So for anyone interested, we'll have opportunities to host you those evenings, and it is free to the public. So I always welcome sort of anyone to come by. And then, of course, they can look up our website, which is ogunquitmuseum.org, to find further information and check us out on Facebook and Instagram too for updates and new events going on.
Now, the exhibitions were just recently, last week, installed. How long will they be on display
Yes.
at the time?
So these shows will be on view until November 12th through Veterans Day.
Wonderful, wonderful. And just a sneak peek of the rest of the year, some of the thoughts and ideas that you and your colleagues have?
Oh, well, I think we'll have a number more dialogues. I will say we are excited for some of the projects that we're looking towards to open up next year and in the forthcoming exhibition seasons. So I will just tease a lot more fun, a lot more exciting and ambitious projects here at OMA, and to kind of follow us and monitor us, because there will be much more fun to be had here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we'll have the museum's website and contact information in the credits, and look forward to staying in touch that way, as well as visiting in person sometime soon. Unfortunately, Devon, we've come to the end of the program. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here, for giving this fabulous overview of the current exhibitions. Congratulations to you and your colleagues for assembling such a wide range of diverse and creative artists, and continued success with future endeavors.
Thank you so much, Jay. It was a pleasure.
Also want to thank those of you watching for joining us, and hope you'll be able to tune in next time.